Good evening, everyone. My name is Indrajit Gupta. I'm a co-founder at Founding Fuel, one of the partners for this dialogue. This dialogue is actually hosted by NatStrat in partnership with the Strategic Foresight Group and Founding Fuel, which I represent. This dialogue builds on a conversation we came together to curate in July 2025 and reflects the continuing effort to think through India's choices, AI choices, with care and depth. This evening is not about showcasing solutions or success strategies at all. It is about examining how national capability is actually built and where India's strategic choices on AI matter most. AI today is not a technology story. It is a story about power, institutions, and coordination, and about the trade-offs that shape national outcomes. We are fortunate to have in the room leaders from across government, national security, academia, industry, and diplomacy, bringing very different vantage points to the same set of questions. We've designed this evening as a single connected arc from strategic context to scientific and institutional capability to policy choices and trade-offs, and finally to collective reflection. Before we begin, a brief word on the flow. Dr. V.K. Saraswat, who was to be with us in person, is currently indisposed. He has, however, recorded a very substantive keynote, which we will play shortly. I wanted to flag this up front and also emphasize that his address remains an important intellectual anchor for the evening. With that, let me invite Ambassador Pankaj Saran to set the strategic context. He's a former Deputy National Security Advisor and currently serves as convener of NatStrat. He has thought deeply about AI not as a sector, but as a strategic domain shaped by power, institutions, and long-term choice. This evening, he will help us frame India's choice in a broader strategic context. Ambassador Saran.
Well, good evening, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen and friends, members of the diplomatic corps. Let me begin by thanking all of you, and especially our expert panelists, for bracing the cold Delhi winter to join us to reflect on a subject which has already become critical for humanity at large. I want to particularly thank Shri Aayog Joshi, Chairman of the National Security Advisory Board, for taking time to be here with us this evening. We are hosting this discussion along with two other partners, the Founding Fuel and the Strategic Foresight Group, both based in Mumbai. So this is a Delhi-Mumbai connectivity. The report that we will release today is the product of many rounds of consultations with experts and as a result of several brainstorming sessions. It is quite clear that AI is going to be the metric of national power. It is the biggest disruption in global technology in the last few centuries. India's advantage to be a world leader arising from 1 billion plus users and human capital are fairly well known. So clearly, the opportunities are immense, but also the challenges are large. I would like to pick on just three aspects for our discussion today to focus our attention given the vastness of the subject. The first is AI is a buzzword today, but also has multiple dimensions. The reality is that the AI revolution is upon us, and there is a race to the top and to outcompete within and between nations. It involves several stakeholders and aspects of both vertical and horizontal integration cutting across many sectors. Today, the picture in India is of an atomized and a disaggregated decision making system. Yet, the fact is that the AI technology will connect all of us as nations and as peoples in many fundamental ways. It is not an isolated technological leap, but a force shaping state capacity and the architecture of global power itself. Nations are pursuing AI supremacy amidst intensifying rivalries. For example, the United States drives innovation through massive investments running into hundreds of billions of dollars, while China counters with efficient models such as the DeepSeek R1, trained at a fraction of Western costs and sparking $1 trillion market shakeup. In both cases, national strategies have been formulated. AI technologies, applications, raw materials, and processes are all being weaponized. Export controls and domination over critical raw materials and technologies is, in fact, the new reality. India would like to position itself in a circle of three, leveraging its vast data pools, talent, and the digital public infrastructure to avoid dependency and claim agency in an intelligence economy projected to add almost $16 trillion by 2030. It is building an ecosystem that harnesses AI for national priorities, from the 2018 National Strategy for Artificial Intelligence, issued by the NITI Aayog, to the 2024 India AI Mission, which democratizes compute and fosters making AI in India and making AI work for India. The second aspect I thought I would focus on and highlight for you is that due to its very nature, many consequential choices and decisions in AI will be taken before their outcomes are fully visible or even understood. A duality of AI capabilities is emerging today between the United States and China. Which supply, which value, and which technology chain should India align itself with? Or should it pursue its own independent technology path? To what extent are these mutually exclusive? Where should we draw the line on data localization and data sovereignty? In other words, the consequences of the choices we make today on AI will determine our existence as the human race and will impact on ethics, on social and individual values, on privacy, on jobs, and indeed on our security. What will, for example, happen to the nature of warfare, to nuclear weapons, and to lethality which transcends human control? Should the competition for AI supremacy be unbridled, above any ethical, moral, or legal frameworks? Or should it be guided by norms and rules at the national and international levels? The third feature of current AI initiatives is speed. We have to be abreast of global developments and keep pace with the AI revolution. But keeping in mind that speed for the sake of speed runs the risk of narrowing future options and reducing room for maneuver. Commitments to compute clusters, data set unlocking via the data empowerment and protection architecture, or alliances for edge AI in dense urban centers will lock in trajectories. Similarly, dominance in foundational models and compute power could redefine alliances and influence. Judgment and restraint are therefore as important as speed itself. So, today's conversation is intended to pause and reflect on the direction and the long-term consequences of AI rather than to come up with solutions. What we want to do tonight is to take a moment to step back, to look at AI through a strategic prism, for the simple reason that AI is simultaneously influencing global shifts as much as it is a product of global competition itself. We should have no doubt that sovereign technological infrastructure, such as chips, compute power, critical minerals, and data centers, as well as national scientific capability and long term resilience, are interlinked and critical for India. In today's world, sovereignty and security are more closely linked than ever before. Should we therefore not, as India, have a strategic framework of AI that synthesizes science with sovereignty and security? Do we agree with this proposition, even as we come from our own respective perspectives, sectors, and responsibilities? It is evident that the choices we make today will define our future tomorrow. There could not be a better time for such a dialogue, given that India is hosting the AI Summit next month. Our intention is to throw up some of the fundamental issues that we believe should not be lost sight as we go forward. With these words, I would like to once again express our very deep gratitude to all of you for being a part of our dialogue and a part of our reflections, which I really hope you will find rewarding. Thank you very much, and a warm welcome once again to the dialogue. Thank you, Indrajit.
Thank you, Mr. Saran. We now move from strategic context to questions of capability. As I'd mentioned earlier, Dr. V.K. Saraswat is unable to join us this evening. He has, however, recorded a substantive keynote for this dialogue. His address will serve as an important reference point for the conversation to follow on institutions, scale, and strategic autonomy. I invite you to listen to this framing intervention for the evening. Let's play the keynote address by Dr. Saraswat.
Very good evening. Very, very happy New Year to all of you. I am indeed very happy to participate in this discourse on strategic autonomy in the age of artificial intelligence. Friends, strategic autonomy has traditionally meant a nation's ability to take sovereign decisions in matters of security, economy, technology, and diplomacy without undue external dependence or coercion. In the 21st century, the concept is undergoing a profound transformation driven by the rapid rise of artificial intelligence. AI is no longer merely an enabling technology. It is becoming a foundational layer of national power, influencing military effectiveness, economic competitiveness, governance capacity, and societal resilience. Consequently, strategic autonomy in the age of AI extends beyond territorial defense and energy security to encompass data sovereignty, algorithmic control, computational capacity, and human capital. AI is a determinant of national power. Artificial intelligence functions as a general purpose technology comparable in strategic impact to electricity or the internet. Its applications span across defense systems, intelligence analysis, cyber operations, logistics, healthcare, finance, and public administration. In fact, nations that control AI ecosystem gain asymmetric advantages like faster decision-making cycles, superior situational awareness, predictive governance, and scalable innovation. Unlike traditional military assets, AI power is cumulative and path-dependent. Early advantages in data accumulation, semiconductor manufacturing, cloud infrastructure, and talent development create self-reinforcing dominance. This concentration of AI capabilities in few countries and corporations raises concerns of technological dependency, strategic vulnerability, and erosion of sovereign decision-making for others. We have two issues. Number one, data sovereignty and algorithmic dependence. In the AI era, data is a strategic resource. Control over national data, civilian, industrial, and defense related, directly influences a state's autonomy. Dependence on foreign digital platforms, cloud providers, or proprietary algorithms can expose sensitive information, distort policy choices, and create hidden levers of influence. Algorithmic dependence is particularly insidious when critical national functions like border control, financial systems, satellite imagery analysis, or battlefield decision aids are powered by the opaque, foreign-owned algorithms. Strategic autonomy is compromised even in the absence of overt questions. Thus, autonomy today requires not only ownership of data, but also transparency, auditability, and controllability of AI systems. The militarization of AI poses unique challenges to strategic autonomy. Autonomous weapon systems, AI-enabled command and control, predictive logistics, and decision support tools compress the observe, orient, decide, act, what we call OODA loop. While this enhances operational effectiveness, it also risks delegating critical judgment to machines trained on biased or incomplete data. For a sovereign state, retaining human in the loop or human on the loop control is not merely an ethical issue, but a strategic one. Reliance on externally sourced AI models for targeting threat assessment or escalation control could constrain independent military decision making. Strategic autonomy therefore demands indigenous development of military AI validated under national doctrines, values, and threat perceptions. There are two dimensions. Number one, economic, the other one is industrial. AI-driven productivity gains are reshaping global value chains. Nations lacking domestic AI capabilities risk deindustrialization, labor displacement without compensation, and technological subordination. Strategic autonomy in this context requires indigenous AI research and innovation ecosystems, secure access to semiconductors and advanced computing hardware, AI-ready industrial and MSME sectors, a skilled workforce capable of developing, deploying, and regulating AI. Industrial dependence on foreign AI tools for design, quality control, and predictive maintenance can silently transfer competitive advantage abroad, weakening long-term economic sovereignty. AI systems increasingly influence the public discourse, electoral process, and citizen behavior through recommender systems, generative models, and synthetic media. Strategic autonomy therefore includes cognitive autonomy, the ability of a society to form opinions and make collective decisions free from algorithmic manipulation or information warfare. Foreign-controlled AI platforms capable of shaping narratives, amplifying social divisions, or eroding trust in institutions represent a non-kinetic but potent threat. Resilient democratic governance in AI requires regulatory capacity, digital literacy, and sovereign oversight of high-impact AI systems. We have to balance autonomy with interdependence. Strategic autonomy does not imply technological isolation or autarky. AI development thrives on collaboration, open science, and global talent flows. The challenges lie in balancing openness with control, cooperation with resilience. Middle powers and emerging economies, in particular, must pursue selective autonomy, develop sovereign capabilities in critical domains while participating in trusted international partnerships. Multilateral frameworks for AI governance, norms for military AI, and supply chain diversification can strengthen collective autonomy without fragmenting the global innovation ecosystem. Now let us look at what India has done. As part of the Indian perspective, I would like to mention that India's pursuit of strategic autonomy in the age of AI reflects a pragmatic blend of self-reliance, openness, and institutional innovation. India's most distinctive contribution lies in its digital public infrastructure, what we call DPI. Platforms such as Aadhaar, UPI, DigiLocker, and the India Stack have created interoperable, population-scale digital rails that generate trusted data flows while remaining under sovereign oversight. This architecture lowers entry barriers for AI innovation, enables public interest applications such as health, welfare delivery, fintech, and reduces dependence on foreign digital monopolies. In defense and national security, India has initiated indigenous AI programs through defense R&D organizations, startups, and academia, focusing on intelligence analysis, logistics optimization, surveillance, and decision support systems. Policy initiatives such as National AI Strategy and recent emphasis on domestic semiconductor manufacturing indicate recognition that AI autonomy requires control over both software and hardware layers. India can certainly draw selective lessons from leading AI powers. India should strategically draw lessons or aspects from global pioneers. From the United States, we can draw lessons on the importance of private sector innovation, strong academia-industry collaboration, and frontier research. From China, we can internalize the value of long-term planning and alignment between civilian and strategic AI capabilities. From Europe, we can borrow an emphasis on ethical, transparent, and accountable AI governance. At the same time, India should recognize the utility of selective autonomy, focusing resources on high-impact domains rather than attempting comprehensive technological dominance. Going forward, India's AI future will depend on strengthening indigenous research, securing access to compute and semiconductors, integrating civil military AI ecosystems, and investing in human capital. Ultimately, India's objective is not technological isolation, but freedom of strategic choice, ensuring that AI enhances national capability without constraining sovereign decision making. To conclude, I would say in the age of artificial intelligence, strategic autonomy is no longer defined solely by borders, armies, or natural resources. It is defined by control over data, algorithms, compute infrastructure, and the human capacity to govern complex machine systems. Nations that fail to secure these foundations risk becoming rule takers in a world increasingly shaped by intelligent machines. True strategic autonomy in the AI era lies not in resisting technological change, but in mastering it, aligning AI development with national values, democratic accountability, and long-term strategic interests. The choices made today, friends, will determine whether AI becomes an instrument of sovereign empowerment or a vector of strategic dependence. It will all depend on all of us. Thank you very much. God bless.
Thank you. We now move very briefly to the unveiling of the report that frames today's dialogue, India's AI Gambit, Navigating the Global Race, prepared by the Strategic Foresight Group. May I now invite Sri Aayog Joshi, Chairman of the National Security Board, Sandeep Vaslekar, the President of the Strategic Foresight Group, Ilmas Fateh Ali, Executive Director, Strategic Foresight Group, and KN Pimple, Founder, CISB Services Private Limited, our sponsor for the evening, to join us for the report Unveiling. What we've heard so far from Ambassador Saran and Dr. Saraswat sets up a clear challenge. If AI is a question of power and long-term capability, what does India need to prioritize and in what sequence? To respond to that, I now invite Sandeep Vaslekar, President of the Strategic Foresight Group, who has worked for several decades at the intersection of strategy, policy, and long-term global risk. He was, incidentally, the co-chair of the talks between the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council on the risks associated with an AI-triggered nuclear war. Sandeep will outline a small number of recommendations anchored in sovereignty, science, and security to frame the discussions that follow. Sandeep?
Thank you, Indrajit, and good evening, everybody. Before we think about recommendations and all that, I want to share a few facts about the global changes, because Ambassador Saran and Dr. Saraswat gave us a very comprehensive and solid perspective of what India should do and how India could approach. There are just 3 or 4 things. Last Thursday, today is the Thursday, so last Thursday, exactly 1 week ago, 2 extremely serious developments took place about AI. One, President Donald Trump sent a note to his cabinet and others that he intends to increase the defense expenditure by 50% overnight. So from $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion, or $1,500 billion. And these $1,500 billion will be primarily for an AI-driven armed forces or AI-driven military. This is the 3rd time in the last 100 years that the US has increased the military expenditure by 50% overnight. The first time it was for the Second World War. The second time it was 1950 for the Korean War. And now this is the 3rd time. It happened 1 week ago. Also last Thursday in London, while this was happening in Washington, another development took place. There was a special session of the House of Lords specifically to discuss 4 AI risks to the UK national security. So it was not about AI's role in the world and future of technology or anything, or even general AI risk. It was specifically to discuss 4 risks to the national security of UK, which I believe would also be relevant to the national security of India, and that's why I would mention them. Risk number 1, which already exists, it's not for future, it already exists. There are AI models which can enable terrorists or anybody to synthesize biological weapons and chemical weapons. This exists today. Now, these models, there are guardrails have been put in place, and the models, you cannot, say a lab technician in Mumbai or Bhopal cannot break those guardrails, and somebody knows who controls those guardrails. So if a terrorist in India anywhere wants to synthesize biological and chemical weapons, he will need a green signal from somewhere, and that somewhere is not Pakistan. But if he can get that, if somebody makes a political choice to cause havoc in India, or for that matter in Thailand or any other country, they don't need to send terrorists via forest of Kashmir or anything anymore. All they need to do is to pass on the source code. That's risk number 1, already existing. Risk number 2, already existing, but in a controlled laboratory way. And that is the risk of self-replication by AI. This is at an embryonic stage. It's not big. It's not out in the market, but it's there in the laboratories. It's controlled. And self-replication means AI can replicate itself. which means this is the first stage for AI to go out of human control. Though that is very far. This is experimental, this is lab, but it exists. Risk number 3 already exists. Sandbagging. Sandbagging is AI behaves in such a way that it understands when it is being supervised by humans. And at that time, the model behaves in a very polite way. It doesn't make any mischief. And the AI can make out when it's not supervised by the humans, and that time it starts self-replicating itself. This already exists, again in a laboratory environment. And risk number 4, which does not exist, it is the biggest headache of NATO. If you have friends in NATO, you talk to them. And that is AI is acquiring capacity at a fast rate to undermine cybersecurity in critical infrastructure, particularly the decision support system of the nuclear weapons. Those from the military background, you know that there is no AI in the command or the launch function of the nuclear weapons. It's a global agreement. It's being honored by Russian, Chinese, everybody. There's no AI, and there will not be AI in the launch functions. But there is AI in the decision support system and early warning system. And there is a new AI capacity being developed to undermine the cybersecurity there. Now, this doesn't exist. But the development of this technology a week ago, 8 January 2026, was about 50% higher than 8 January 2025. So in 1 year, it has progressed a lot. So this technology could be theoretically there in 27 or 28. And after that, health will break loose. The last thing already exists. And this is not about security risk. This is about the concept of AI itself. In November, the United States launched something called Genesis mission. Now, the Genesis mission, President Trump said in a note circulated to his MAGA colleagues and others, is the third most important scientific project of the United States in the history of the United States. The first was Manhattan Project, which led to the Oppenheimer creating the nuclear test. The second was Apollo, which led the man to the moon. And this is the third. And this third project is about AI. And this project defines that AI should be for science and security. And the concept of science in Washington, as well as in Beijing, and I'll come to Beijing in a minute, is not your ChatGPT and DeepSeek and all that. That's not even considered AI by Xi Jinping or Donald Trump or all those people. I myself did search and I found that DeepSeek and ChatGPT and Grok don't even figure in the top 20 models of AI. The topmost is Autonomy 0. The second is AlphaFold 3. This is where. So the AI, according to the American game plan and the Chinese game plan, is an AI which will do scientific discovery, not scientific innovation. Scientific discovery. There's a difference between discovery and innovation. And their immediate target they are developing AI to develop new rules in biology and chemistry and new chemical compounds. That's the immediate target. Their long-term target is to develop new rules of physics. They think right now new rules of physics is too difficult, but immediate target is new rules. Okay, so that's the Chinese have a counterpart of Genesis M, and Chinese counterpart is called Science 1. On 26th April, I was in China, and on that day, Xi Jinping had a full one-day session where he was personally engaged with the Politburo of the CCP. And I got to see some text of Xi Jinping's remarks there. I'm sure they released only what they wanted to share. They wouldn't release everything with me. But basically, the gist was in one sentence. And Xi Jinping told his Politburo member that he's not satisfied with the progress of science and security in the Chinese AI. And Donald Trump, a lot of people who are following foreign policy might be thinking, that he's one crazy person who wakes up in the morning and takes some strange decisions. But that's not the case. Donald Trump has a group who advises him, and his guru is Peter Thiel. And Peter Thiel formulates a lot of the policies. So if Donald Trump thinks that he needs to acquire Greenland or be friendly with Pakistan, the decisions are taken in Palo Alto, Seattle, and Texas, not in Mar-a-Lago, not in White House. And now, Peter Thiel basically started this whole thing that America is falling back in science. So everybody I interact with the leadership in Washington and in Beijing feels that US and China are falling behind in science, and with AI they want to go ahead. Everybody I interact with, my friends in Delhi and Mumbai, they say we are doing great. But there's a different thinking in Washington and Beijing. So in this situation, Indrajit will soon show me a time card and say that your time is up. And I ask you to make recommendations and why you are talking about Washington and Beijing. But unless you know, because everybody says we should build the capacity, but capacity is for what? You build capacities for cricket, and the game in town is soccer. So I first explain what is a game in town, and now we'll see what capacity we need. So I would say first and foremost, I see some of the very distinguished members, including our co-host Pankaj Saran, who have long national security experience. First and foremost, National Security Council, or whatever the body, I'm not familiar with the structures of the government in Delhi, should convene an urgent meeting to look at three things. One, is there any way we can stop or control or regulate the import of the particular AI models which pose these four risks? I'm not saying any. I mean, you start stopping import of everything, you'll go crazy. Nobody will deal with you. But these four specific models, the ones which pose possibility of making biological synthetic weapons, which will potentially enable disruption of nuclear weapons, self-replication, and out of control. These four. Is there a possibility? This is a deeply scientific question. So this is a matter which is not for a domain ministry. This is a matter where NSA and PSA have to come together, form a committee of experts, both from science, deep science, and from the national security background, and examine this. That's one. Number two, to explore whether you can introduce some kind of mandatory assessment card for every national security assessment card for every model that is either developed within the country or imported from outside or deployed from outside. If you don't do this, and in the name of innovation and free market and all that, that is all fine, but I think national security cannot be compromised. So at least on the national security assessment, there should be a mandatory card or a mandatory report of each model, what it means for India's national security. And it should be made mandatory. This is a question you have to examine. And the third and the last, the National Security Council needs to think whether it can create some kind of a unit or a mechanism which hour by hour is following the developments in the technology, especially some of the dangerous technologies. So these are some of the things where NSA and PSA have to take the leadership. The second part of this recommendation is that these matters have been far too long, last 3 years, being just managed in a small circle of bureaucracy. I told you just now that 1 week ago, House of Lords had a dedicated debate just on risk. Every major parliament in the world is having full-fledged discussion on AI, what it means for their country. South Africa for last 2 years is debating an AI bill. Brazil is debating AI bill in the parliament. South Korea is debating AI bill in the parliament. Angola just passed the AI bill. Now, Angola, a small country of 36 million people. And they passed the bill which is the most threatening to the big tech companies. You should study the AI parliamentary bill of Angola and how Angola got guts to challenge every big AI company from China and US. what is happening? Why are we not discussing, having an informed debate in the Indian Parliament? So my second recommendation is that the AI policy should be discussed from security, sovereignty, and science point of view in the Indian Parliament. And the third and the last suggestion about the AI in science. On the 3rd of November, the Prime Minister announced a R&D fund of 1 lakh crores. This is a major step taken by the Indian leadership. And before that, he had, the government had announced 50,000 crores of another fund. Some of the people here will know the details. So you have 150,000 crores of government funds available. I don't think much of it will be used because it was just 3rd November and we are in January now. It should be a concentrated effort of the country as a mission to use these funds really for deep science, not for innovation, so just cost-cutting innovation. Nowadays, the cost-cutting innovation is used as a euphemism for attracting funds from the government and doing anything. And deep science, so the future of AI is going to be brain-inspired AI. We are lucky to have Manan Suri. He is doing neuromorphic computing. If I were in the government, I would give him 10,000 crores right away because that is the future of AI. And that's hardware. But along with neuromorphic computing, what he's doing, we also need neurosymbolic AI, where there is no effort in India, zero, almost, nothing to be counted. You also need very highly sophisticated mathematical reasoning models, and we need to invest in that. If you do mathematical reasoning models, you will do. We need AI in material prediction and developing new materials, especially rare earth extraction. These are the kind of areas where this money has to go. And then finally, we need to create an ecosystem because just money is not going to solve the problem. Just the cabinet is not going to solve it. So I would say, in the end, echoing what Dr. Saraswat said, that we have to look at the future of AI as a challenge for the nation. It's not a matter of one section of bureaucracy. It's a matter for the National Security Council. It's a matter for the Parliament. It's a matter for the industry. It's a matter for the scientists. It's a matter for the entrepreneurs. It's a matter for India as a nation and India as one team. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep. Your presentation has certainly helped sharpen the questions we now need to examine together. We now bring together three voices who see India's AI challenge from the inside of science, security, and the state. And I'd request each of them to come up to the stage as we introduce them, starting with Manan Suri. Manan is a leading researcher at IIT Delhi and brings the perspective of science, research, institutions, and long-term capacity. Air Marshal S.P. Dharkar, former Vice Chief of the Air Staff, Air Marshal Dharkar, he brings decades of experience at the intersection of technology, defense, and national security. Dr. Preeti Bansal is advisor and senior scientist in the office of the Principal Scientific Advisor. She brings the state's perspective on how capacity is coordinated, governed, and sustained. And finally, anchoring this conversation is Anirudh Suri, who's a policy expert and author, and who can help us examine the trade-offs and choices that emerge from these perspectives. Anirudh, over to you.
Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think my task has been made easier by the excellent set of presentations that we've seen and the, I think, extremely passionate yet very well-reasoned address, Sandeep, and the report that I hope all of you get a chance to read. If I may, I'm going to get straight to it, but I'll only mention one thing to our fellow panelists and to you. I think in the spirit of what Sandeep has also laid out and Dr. Saraswat did, Ambassador Saran did, it's of course a very important topic that we're discussing, this intersection of AI with science, sovereignty, and security. And I think for too many months and maybe years, we have patted ourselves on the back for things that we have done. But I think it's always important to always be focused on the things that maybe we are not focused on or not getting done. And so my goal here, sitting with the esteemed panelists that I have to my right, is going to be to shake things up, not accept things that seem to be high level. So I encourage all of our panelists today as we move through this panel to be specific, hopefully with very specific recommendations for many of the decision makers that are also sitting in this room. So with that brief introduction, the first piece that we're going to try and answer, the first question that we're going to try and address is where are we as India on the foundational pieces that we need to get our AI strategy right and get our AI adoption and implementation right? Where are we on those foundational pieces? Compute, infrastructure, data, talent, R&D, capital, etc. We're then going to move into the second piece, which is the intersection of AI with national security, where I'm going to call upon Air Marshal Dharkar to lead that part of the discussion, where how is AI being adopted in the national security establishment of India, both within the armed forces and elsewhere, and where are there gaps, what are the structural challenges that we face and how to overcome them. And the third piece is going to be a little bit more recommendation focused, which will be where are those cross-institutional collaborations needed within India so that India can evolve its own military, government, academia, industry, and startup complex that together, as Sandeep, you mentioned, as a team effort, and as we've seen in the US and China, various models have evolved for this public-private collaboration along with academia and research. And so what does that model for India look like? Where are the challenges specifically coming? And how can we overcome? So those are the three broad sections we'll try and have over the course of the next 40 minutes. With that, let me first invite Manan. And I'm not starting with him because he's a fellow Suri. But really because Manan brings two key perspectives. The perspective, of course, research and academia, sitting in IIT Delhi and doing excellent research, as Sandeep mentioned, but also from a startup standpoint, having been part of the IDEX program, also from the Ministry of Defense perspective. Manan, if I may have you start us off with where the first question that I laid out, which is where are we on those foundational capabilities? Where are the gaps from the at least two hats that you wear?
Sure. Thank you, Anirudh. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to the organizers for having me to share, some thoughts and opinions. The whole question about AI, right? If we look at the nuts and bolts or the ingredients behind it, we have about 4 or 5 different pillars, which, when they come together, lead us to the AI or the so-called AI paradigm. The first thing is obviously data, the algorithms, compute or infra, which enables the churning of this data through the algorithms. Then there is skill, adequate skill, appropriate skill to drive these systems, build these systems, and then finally, policy. So I think we really need to ask ourselves that as a nation, what sort of leverage we have or what sort of leverage we are building in a global context for each of these pillars, right? And it's a bit concerning to say that to see and say that there are two of the pillars, one data and the other is skill. That is where we have the numbers. That is something which we are able to generate. But then are we able to convert it to a leverage? That is what we need to address, right? And as far as in my opinion, my personal opinion, the most important thing for all of this AI and even the future of AI or however you call it will be the compute infra, the silicon, the bare metal or the chips or the circuits which power all of this. The algorithms will be in a flux. The algorithms is the mathematics, the statistics that has been there around for several decades. In fact, what has actually enabled or empowered those algorithms is the access to the compute, powerful compute. So I think that is the most important aspect in my opinion.
So, if I may, before I move to Dr. Bansal, Manan, you mentioned that we have the data and we have the talent and the skill. If I may push back on that, if you look at our data as India today, whether it's data from a commercial standpoint or from a security standpoint, etc., or data that you need for research, specifically in the sectors that the Indian government has said are priority sectors in a way, healthcare, education, agri, isn't too much of the data still locked in silos and not accessible to researchers or startups? Question one. Second, on the talent piece, if I may push back on that also, one of the pieces I wrote recently on the missing pieces in India's AI puzzle, I said that actually while we pat ourselves on the back for being a talent nation, and you are very much a part of that for India, do we have the right kind of AI talent sitting here as well? Because the software engineers that we are very proud of, that are in thousands and hundreds of thousands sitting in Bangalore, that's not necessarily the talent that we are looking for cutting edge AI innovation, let's say. So on those 2 points, if you may share your thoughts on the data and the talent, are we actually that well off?
So I have a slightly different, thought. I think it's very tactical to just think that whether the data is being available to the researchers or to industry, or whether we have the right kind of talent. A more strategic way of thinking it from national capacity would be, we are heading towards an age where AI will govern the geopolitics, right? So as a national capacity, are we, protecting our data? Or are we playing out the right way to have that data as a leverage from a national context? That is what we must be looking at. So models are built on data, and if those models are going to come back to India being offered not as a priority one, or if they are going to be used as a leverage in a national context, then that is, I would say, that is a more in my opinion, that is from a long term perspective, that is the lens at which we should look at data with. Obviously internal sharing is opening up. The government's geospatial data sharing policy is one example in that direction, where for internal consumption data sharing is opening up. The same goes for talent. Talent number is there. Answering that whether it is the right talent is maybe a subset. The bigger question is the talent number that we have in this age where AI will be used as a geopolitical tool. Are we leveraging it? Is the country monetizing it? Is the IPR for the country getting monetized in the right way from a national capacity building standpoint? So that is what.
Excellent. And one last question to you before I move to Dr. Bansal. I think Sandeep raised this question, and I thought it's a very relevant one, so I want to ask you. The whole world seems to be, at least in the mainstream media, focused on LLMs. We have talked as a country about our sovereign LLMs. We have identified companies to build sovereign LLMs. AI, of course, is a much broader set of technologies. So in our research, in our focus, in our resource allocation as a country, do you think we are focused on the right set of things within the broader field of AI? Or are there 3 or 4 other maybe pieces of that AI technology scope that you think we could focus on?
Yeah. So unfortunately, the dominant focus is more on exploitation or the last layer or utilization layer. That is using LLMs or what you do with LLMs. So that is where the more dominant focus is on. But I think in the long run, the AI race is a resource intensive race. So because AI runs on enormous amounts of energy. So from a long term planning point of view, the key differentiator will be energy efficient AI. So things like edge compute or low power compute or chips or architectures, things like optical computing, photonic computing, neuromorphic computing, anything that cuts down the energy budget of generating AI, training AI, inferencing AI. So that is where the core focus should be in the long run.
No, excellent. I think that's an excellent point. In a recent conversation I was having with Professor Stuart Russell, who's at the University of California, Berkeley, we were discussing exactly this question. Is there an end to the amount of energy guzzling infrastructure that we are building and the compute and the processing that we're building today in that global race for LLM and AI domination? Or is actually a more energy efficient focus a better strategic focus? So great. Dr. Bansal, let me now bring you in. You, of course, are with the Office of the PSA. At the core of, I think, India's R&D and science efforts to, I think, reimagine our scientific research institutions, collaboration between industry and academia. I'll start off with the same basic question for you. Where are we on those foundational pieces that we need for AI? But within that, I also want you to address something that I noted in the report also that has been released today, that India's AI strategy seems to be state-driven. Do you agree with that? And if you do agree with that, do you think that's the right way to do it? Because if you look at the US and China, the two current leaders in AI, by most measures, they seem to have a very private and public aligned approach. So maybe you can address that piece also.
Thank you, Anirudh. A very good evening to all of you, and I'm really thankful for this opportunity. There has been a comprehensive discussion started with Dr. Saraswat, and then Vaslikar Sahab has spoken about the importance and strategic importance of AI. So I would like to start with a positive note here. So AI is for all. This is what our strategy says. And the Stanford 2025 list says about the vibrancy within India, we are at third rank after US and China. It's a very good sign. And, there is a process cycle for everything. So deployment at the population's scale itself is not a bad idea to begin with. And on the side of it, the government or the ecosystem development, you told the state-run strategy, or, if you see the China, with all regards to their policy, it's also state-driven. The private comes as a partner for the commercialization and other stuff. India is following the similar kind of thing, and considering the kind of resource-intensive requirement is there. Manan has mentioned about compute. It's important that government comes into play and create kind of resource pool so that access or the barrier to research for our researchers and startups reduces. And therefore, it's important to create resource like 38,000 GPU. And having said that, when India AI mission was envisaged, initially we were discussing about 10,000 GPUs.
Correct.
And within very small time, it has reached to 38,000. And if the government is expanding at this stage, then the number will not limit at this. Because, the indigenous foundation model development, the Sarvam and all those, to name a few, their requirement is so intensive. So government certainly is going to expand the resource pool. And therefore, if you see the life cycle of any technology development, particularly like AI, with a strategic dual use, a government has to come in play. And that is what government is following. Having said that, industry is partnering in the India AI mission. There are 7 pillars. And the pillars related to tech development and the research is very much being anchored in academic institution as well as industry.
Great. I've noted, I think, a bunch of very, excellent moves within the AI mission. One being to set up those centers of excellence at various IITs, I believe. And of course, I think the research institutions play a big role in this. And I would also say that you're right, that the Chinese model, of course, is state-driven. One can argue even in the US, the last several years, they've been thinking from a government standpoint very actively about where the AI race is going, where they are competing with the Chinese. But let me push back a little bit again. Are we in a position as the Indian government, despite now being the third or fourth largest economy, to dedicate the kind of resources and capital that's needed to win or compete? Because our India AI mission, I believe, is at about $1 billion+ allocation from the budget. The RDI fund that was mentioned is 100,000 crores, but spread over 5 years. So that's 20,000 crores a year. But if you look at some of the numbers cited here in this report, you see that both on the GPU side in terms of the resource allocation that's being done by, let's say, the Chinese government. If you were to take that as an example, of course, they're 5 times bigger than us as an economy. Are we in a position to allocate enough? Or do you think the bulk of the funding here actually should be coming from the private sector, with maybe the initial seed being done by the Indian government?
I think the answer is both. The government is ramping up the investment, and which is very much needed. But private sector should also come up and invest in
So
the
could you give us a sense of
core
what kind of
research.
ratio we should be looking at? Just to be more specific, like if you were to think of the larger resource allocation towards AI in India, is it that the government should be 80% to privates 20%, 50-50, or some kind of ratio?
Okay, so the government has not yet come out with some figure, but if we want to draw a parallel, say for example, I think Vaslikar Saab spoke about ANRF and RDI, 2 schemes. So 1 lakh crore
Correct.
for the RDI and 50,000 for ANRF. Now for the RDI is purely for private. It's long-term loans and grants, very, very bold move by the government.
Yes.
And even the funds will be managed by not by the government or IITs and all. So it's very different in its design itself. Now for the ANRF, the government has thought through that 14,000 crore across 5 years' time will come from government, and the rest is anticipated to come for the private. So it is 14 versus 36,000 crore as envisaged in ARF, and now it's private sector to come up and respond to this call for government. That is the one thing. And the second thing about the matching the investment with respect to China or the US, I think at this stage, it's not good to compare the scale or whatever, considering our GDP size, and that at the time of entry we are entering into this, but rather we should look into the gradient of expansion or the curve at the speed with which we are expanding, and that is very important. And the second piece is that China has shown about through the DeepSeek that it's not about the compute intensive resources, but it's also about energy efficient algorithms, and also joining the hands to, instead of entering into long LLM race, enter into SLM and the agentic AI system, and which government is certainly moving towards that.
Great. And the last question before I move to Air Marshal Dharkar, to you, Dr. Bansal, would be, if you were to look at the 6 or 7 pillars of the India AI mission, and Manan also mentioned the pieces required here, where do you think India stands strongest? And where are maybe the weaker points amongst those 6 or 7 pillars? So between data, R&D...
okay, again, difficult
compute.
to compare apple and orange, but the strong field is future skill prime, which is capacity building.
The skilling piece of
Capacity
it.
building, the skilling part, that is a strong piece. And so is the case for the compute shared infrastructure, because, you know, we have a history of having DPI. So certainly scaling that, like DPI for AI or AI to DPI, those kind of things, we know how to scale. So we have positive point there. Now the third piece, which nobody has spoken about, that is the regulation. US has something, no regulation approach. And there is EU, the GDPR Act, EU AI Act, which is supposedly slowing down their growth. I don't know. People do say. I do not have sufficient data to claim this. Now, what is the third approach or the middle path? I think you spoke about the middle path, I have noted. So the middle path is our techno-legal regulation, which encourage people with hands-off without reduce the compliance burden for the small startups. If the deployment is not at that scale and the risk is not, perceived risk is not that big, then we can go with a combination. And the techno-legal approach is something which India wants to push as a unique approach. And we are extensively working on that. And therefore, safe and trusted pillar of AI, the 7th pillar, we are going to attain leadership.
Great. With that, let me now move to you, sir, Marshal Dharkar. Today, of course, we are in a discussion where we're not looking only at the commercial aspects of AI. I think, as has been rightly pointed out, there are serious implications for India's national security that arise out of the AI evolution, both within India, but in any case, when you're fighting a battle, you have to be focused not just on your AI capabilities, but also, even more importantly, maybe the AI capabilities of the adversary. So if I may invite you to share some thoughts on where India stands on AI X national security, where are we getting things right, where are there still gaps, and what can be maybe learned from other countries.
Thank you, Andrew. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a privilege to be here. And I'll jump right into what Anirudh just mentioned. Where are we? Where are there gaps? Where do we find ourselves doing well? Let me just start with the basics, saying that where we seem to be doing well is that there is adequate, abundant recognition that we need to work in this domain. That itself, in my opinion, is a good starting block to work from. Where are the gaps? The fact that we lag reasonably behind, forget the world leaders, we lag reasonably behind a number of entities out there in the world, including our adversaries, is where we need to hasten what we are doing. And taking away from both what Manan and Preeti have mentioned, there is adequate work that has been initiated. What has changed, or what requires to change actually, is that the acceleration in this across domains needs to be both assisted, enabled, legislated, and alongside it, somewhat regulated. To find a fine balance, to strike an adequate balance amongst all these is where the challenge will lie. But alongside that, the other challenges that also remain would be that currently we do not definitely have a skill set in the middle level hierarchy who will actually work on this adequately, which means that the processes that we will incorporate need to change from what we've been doing so far, whether it is in the manner in which we construct new mechanisms to build and harness AI, whether it is the manner in which we use cross-domain transfer of data, whether within only the military domain or alongside that in the entire national security matrix, whether we allow this in an entirely government-run or a government-aided and a public-private partnership kind of an approach, the amount of resource that we allocate to this, both in terms of finance, infrastructure, and most importantly, time. Because if we stick to our existing mechanisms and methodologies of whether it is procurement or of upskilling or of harnessing human resource, then I guess the time that we will take in actually getting to some level of capability, everything else will have moved at breakneck speed, and that gap, if in my opinion, will only build to an extent. We will not have managed to reduce it. Taking from all these, there is in the security forces, there is abundant caution in allowing too much of private inclusion into AI structures. Largely, our interaction, in my opinion, has been with academia, and in that also with select academia, who are also otherwise enabled by the government or have some kind of their own projects or programs running in this regard. Now that one will have to firstly increase. The human resource pool that will need to come into here would not be classically uniform pool, and we will have to work with a non-uniform, largely civilian, Gen Z kind of approach in this regard, because if you were to leave it to graying or grayed out individuals, we probably will be missing that bus. I think we need to harness young talent. We seem to have been given $100,000 per person bailout by the US government in how they've gone into some recent legislation, which will, in my opinion, make a lot of talent available for the taking, provided that we look at doing it in a slightly different manner than we have done so far.
No, great. So, Air Marshal Thakur, a few specific questions for you, some coming out of your remarks themselves. The public-private piece, right, which we discussed even on the foundational capabilities question. You also mentioned that while you want to, there are serious constraints. So give us some color on how the armed forces are currently thinking of balancing those, right? As you rightly said, you want to induct that talent to help you with your capability building, but at the same time, there is abundant caution being exercised. How do you do it in a way that moves quickly enough without maybe losing some of the concerns that the armed forces might legitimately have about inducting people who are not wearing uniforms?
Sandbox environments don't work very well in AI because a model that works away from the battlefield may not necessarily stand you good stead when the chips are down. However, alongside, there is adequate both recognition and the acceptance that we would have to partner with institutions, with private entities, and start with somewhat a minimalistic approach, but build it from there as the trust quotient builds. Some additional regulatory and legislative move by the government would also assist in this regard in terms of managing both the data structures, the human resource structures, and the funding in this regard. Some of it is happening. Whether it is happening at the pace at which we would like it to happen, I would reserve comment on. I would like it to be much, much faster.
The other question, I think that from my own interaction with the armed forces, seems to be that a lot of the technology that you today need, because battles are coming fast and hard now. We've seen just in the last 3 years so many hot wars. We have been part of a border conflict ourselves. It seems that the technology needed to win today's wars is very quickly moving to the cutting edge and to the emerging technologies. Like this time we saw the use of drones very actively, and of course, precision attacks are important, satellite imagery that you need. And of course, our adversaries are collaborating with each other. One of our adversaries seems to be technologically very advanced, right? And can aid other adversaries, as we saw. So in that kind of environment, we don't have the kind of time that we might need for these models of public-private collaboration to be worked out slowly and steadily, right? Unfortunately. And as a result, it seems to me that our other alternative is to purchase technology from abroad. And then that raises the questions, I think, that was set out earlier of strategic autonomy, decision-making. I think Dr. Saraswat clearly laid those out. How can the armed forces balance this need for strategic autonomy on one side, while also being at the cutting edge of tech and innovation on the other? Because when you need to win a war, if you lose because you didn't adopt the best technology, no one's going to praise you for it, right? So you have to manage somehow this balance. So how do you think, what are some specific things that maybe could work well here?
Well, you did mention the balance altogether, and yes, it will have to be done parallelly. If you look at it today, we barely have anything in the digital world that we do largely by ourselves. Most of it relies on hardware and software, or even in terms of the data management structures, lies in foreign shores, or is sourced from foreign entities. It would have to be parallel because while that is a move by the government in its own way in order to start off with silicon chip building, or thereafter, working on some kind of open source models to build from there and accelerate that process. It will have to be done parallelly because the adversary has a vote, and when you could go to real conflict is not only decided by you, which means then that if you've got to be prepared for it, you've got to use what is available to you by acquisition and work alongside to make your own as we go along. The pace of that would depend upon, or would seriously be governed by how much resource we put into it, and what kind of variations are we willing to accept as we go along. Variations in terms of how we do business, both in terms of the acquisition and the setup.
A couple other quick questions before we move on. Air Marshal Thakur, if you were to talk about the resource allocation, a similar question as I asked Dr. Bansal, if I was to ask you now, if today, and I don't know the exact numbers, I don't know if you do, but let's say we were allocating today a rupee towards AI adoption, integration, development in the armed forces, how much do you think it needs to be?
And this is straight off like the back of an envelope. I do not have any real knowledge on the subject, but I would believe by 2 orders of magnitude.
So 2x or 100x? 100x. So 100x. That's the kind of question I just wanted to get, because it can at least tell you where, how much you need to move.
The reason is that in the initial part, because you will have to procure a lot of this, you do not have own intrinsic capability to set out and manufacture that on my own, which means while you set that up, and it'll take a large amount of money, you also will have to spend a reasonable amount of money to set up in quick time what we need now.
Yeah.
At least for some time. And I believe half a decade, a 5-year timeline is a fair consideration to look at that. But I believe that is the kind of resource allocation you'll have to do. And though a figure of 100 lakh crore was mentioned, that exists over a reasonable timeline. I think maybe about a fourth of that in a shrunk timeline of about half a decade is what is essential. That's an entirely personal opinion. It's a back of the envelope answer.
Sure. The last question I want to pose to you is, AI is not just being used in traditional domains. AI is enabling new domains of warfare. Cyber was mentioned by Sandeep earlier. There's also, of course, the whole dimension of cognitive warfare, information warfare, the narrative wars that we saw last year as well. Is that piece going to be fought by our armed forces? Or is that going to have to be fought by non-uniform wearing institutions or individuals of India?
The simple answer would be, of course, that yes, it would be fought by the armed forces, but I would be incorrect if I were to restrict it to that, because one will have to harness national capability across domains in order to really make it happen. On 3 counts, this becomes vital. You did point out the various domains across which this becomes relevant. Yes, whether it is the entire dime matrix is covered in that. And for that, mere uniformed power is inadequate, which means it would have to be an all-of-government approach necessarily, whether in any which way you look at it. And the rate at which AI capability is morphing across the world would necessitate that in times of need, everybody who has any capability in this regard gets together to assist it. So obviously, while the law of armed conflict says something, unfortunately, all those agreements seem to be being put aside in various ways and means by different entities across the world as we see it. And so I don't really believe we need to be heavily bound upon those laws, because there is more breaking of those laws than the making of them.
Great. Now, before we move into the third piece, which is the specific recommendations I'm going to ask all of you to start making on the cross-institutional collaboration, etc., I want to invite a couple of people from the audience to maybe do very short but targeted interventions, basis what you've heard or otherwise. Air Marshal Sinha, if I may start with you.
Thank you. Lovely hearing everybody. Few things which coming out very clearly are that strategic autonomy is extremely important for our nation. And why I'm saying that, because last 1 year, the changes that are taking place across the world, we have to do things on our own. I'm very clear about that. Yeah? Like Trump and Xi Jinping met in South Korea, and they discussed chips and magnets, and of course soybeans. 3 things. So we have to start making things on our own. It will take time, maybe 10 years or 15 years, whatever. If you look at the price of the GPUs, Blackwell costs about close to $40,000. Rubin, which is the latest GPU, is about $50,000. Can we afford that? And what if they stop giving it to us? So that is something to look at. People have spoken about it, but we need to make these things on our own. It'll take some time. That's one. Secondly, a bit about AI. We know this invention is going to make itself better. Unlike fire or oil or electricity, AI will make itself better. It's very different from what we've seen in the past. But keep that in mind. And the book by Ray Kurzweil, he talks about singularity. We must have all read about that. That's a point when AI will start improving itself and you can't control it. So 3 thought processes on this. One is containment, That is Mustafa Suleiman. He talks about that. We know that. Second is alignment. Make AI work as per your requirement. And the third is what we all discuss out here is optimistic. Like Juan Jensen says, AI will be great for human beings. So if you look at these aspects also, where are we going with AI in our country? Can we control it? And what is the future of AI? That is something which I want to put across. And lastly is what Dharkar mentioned and everybody mentioned. What do we do with AI? How will we make it happen in our country? I think it's very simple as you look at it. Of course, difficult to do it. Big money, which the government is giving. The private players have to come in, big companies, and the creamy layer from IITs. I went to IIT Kanpur, I went to IIT Hyderabad. You talk to these people, they can do wonders. Of course, he's also there out here, he knows that. This combination of money and these people not going out, like Speedy mentioned, Harkar mentioned about, thanks to Trump closing the doors, is the future for us. Thank you.
Great. No, thank you for that. Nitin, if I may bring you in also for a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Anirudh. I think I'll restrict myself to AI in national security. And one example here, one or two issues that I envisage is how do people working in civilians who want to work or are to be inducted into, giving AI use to defense services, how do they access data? That I think the security clearances are going to be an issue. Maybe the American model where they have inducted Palantir, Meta AI, and all those 4 tech company people as lieutenant colonels in their reserve unit should be the way forward. If Manan has to actually work on the AI model for defense, or you have to give them advice, or I have to work on, say, cognitive warfare strategies, do we get data at all from the armed forces given our strict regulations? I think that's something that to think about. Otherwise, we'll just keep talking about and talking at each other rather than looking at how to harness all of nation approach, not just all of government approach. What Marshal Dharkar said about all of government, I would try and tweak it to all of nation approach rather than all of government approach. Not just in the government, but in the civilian sector. How do you bring them into defense? Because your decision loop is going to be shorter and shorter as you go forward, thanks to AI as well as other technologies that has come in. And there, how do you stay ahead of the adversary is going to be the challenge. And I think there is some work happening on that as far as civilian induction into or civilian cooperation with the military is concerned. But I think some work needs to be done there.
No, great. So strategic autonomy, induction of talent in a way that works. Now, those were just meant as initial provocations, and for us to break the monotony of us talking and the audience listening. But I'm going to this time go around this side, and starting with Air Marshal Dharkar. Now, the third piece that I had mentioned that we want to try and cover is now a set of specific recommendations, specifically keeping 2 or 3 things in mind. What we've discussed. One, it seems. Private-public collaboration. Second, cross-institutional collaboration. Right. So the piece that we've discussed: academia, industry, startups, the government, and the armed forces. What changes can be brought in, specific ones, so that you can have greater collaboration amongst these, more seamless and faster, I think, as all of you have highlighted. And if I may add and get your views, all 3 of yours, and this might be a little bit provocative, but let's do it, is who in India should be driving our AI strategy and implementation? Should it be centralized? Should it be decentralized? Each ministry, each domain on its own, more centralized, and whatever recommendation you have on that piece, maybe describe what that structure could look like.
Should I take first?
Sure, ma'am. Yeah. Please.
Okay, so AI is interdisciplinary in nature, and therefore one AI rule cannot work. It's sector-specific guidelines and regulations. So recently, we have released AI guidelines for AI governance, and we have taken a stand that instead of having a single AI Act or anything, let us have sectoral regulators improving their existing regulation, tweaking it if required to fit in AI nuances. And secondly, helping coordination between them, so to have a whole of government approach. Because you see, we have IT Act, we have DPDP, we have Bharati Nyaya Sahita, and in all the acts, there are provisions, legal provisions, which can be applied to AI. Certain nuances may be required, and those things are to be changed. And so is the case for sector regulation, because each sector with specific use cases have different requirements. So the guidelines and the changing in existing regulation is the stand which we are taking. Because, we have to also remember that we cannot enhance the compliance burden on new entrants, and we have to expand the ecosystem as well.
But may I ask, ma'am, so let's say if I was to take the financial sector as an example, you have the SEBI as the regulator there. But really the expansion of the financial sector is not being driven necessarily by SEBI, right? So my question actually is, if we were to look at our objective as AI adoption, AI innovation, AI diffusion, clearly the regulator is playing a different role. My question was actually, who can drive that adoption and innovation? Who in India, institutionally, should be driving that?
You see, we have India AI mission as an aggregator of all those areas. So one ministry is already there. But expanding it across the sectors, sector-specific guidelines should come, because again, one rule cannot fit in, depending on the perceived risk, the use cases, the size of deployment. And very importantly, we say AI innovation. Innovation could be, as you have spoken, innovation could be optimization of existing things, or it could be as deep as creating something new. So we have to enter into both areas, core research as well as optimization and inferencing and all those cycles. And therefore, it's important to encourage innovation in and ensuring the responsible AI also across AI life cycle. And therefore, putting a single rule or something is not going to help. And it is an iterative process. So we are waiting and seeing how things unfold.
Air Marshal Thakur.
Yeah, while I would like to speak on behalf of all the three services in this regard. However, there are three parallels between AI and Air Force business that I would like to kind of highlight here. It's about speed, reach, and flexibility. I believe all three apply as much to the use of air power as we've seen in history, as with how AI is doing business today. And if I were to take from that, then I would believe something like centralized control with decentralized execution is a model that would work very well. Because otherwise, it would take away from the flexibility that is possible. And at the same time, if you don't have centralized control, then it would take away from, or it would probably draw everybody in so many different directions that it won't work very well. So I think that's just given that there are these three important commonalities between these two aspects of future warfare, since I'm looking at AI in the security domain as we speak about this. So I think that kind of a model is essential, and that kind of adds on to what Preeti just mentioned.
Manan, if I may bring you both on that question maybe, but more importantly on that cross-institutional piece that I asked. Are you satisfied with where our cross-institutional linkages have come to over the last few years, having been part of the IDEX program, being part of a startup, being in academia? You're seeing industry, academia, armed forces, everyone from your vantage point. How satisfied are you with the progress of these cross-institutional linkages as far as AI is concerned? And what kind of changes might you recommend to improve that further?
Sure. So certainly, I mean, there have, the way from where I've been looking at since last few years, there have been a lot of welcome schemes, welcome moves for bringing people together for AI, whether it is through IDEX or any other such mechanism, or even the India AI mission. Now, there is a peculiar aspect that one needs to appreciate with technologies like AI, and this gets amplified when you're going inter-institution, right? Which is the fact that AI at the end of the day is a probabilistic technology, right? Unlike most other legacy technologies which have been built or adopted, which are more deterministic, let alone AI, even if you talk about AI, cyber, or quantum, all these three are probabilistic technologies. So Now, how do you trade with probabilistic technologies in an interinstitutional environment, right? The books, the procedures, the mechanisms that exist to assess any output or any deliverable that is prevalent out there is mostly for deterministic technologies, for deterministic outcomes. So perhaps it needs to be seen with that lens that with these new emerging technologies, if we have to benefit on their induction, if we have to, because in my opinion, the leverage will not come with who has the perfect AI, but who moves first with AI, who moves ahead with AI. It's more of a technology of scale. So scale with the right pace, with the right time, so that cannot be missed out. So for interinstitutional framework, where we need to work is to have more flexible assessment tools, more flexible assessment options to assess intrinsically a probabilistic technology, something which is not deterministic. That is one. Now, your second question, who should be driving it? Anyone who drives India in the nation of becoming an AI OEM and not an AI services economy is the one who should be driving it. Because, sector after sector, if we keep going the services route, it's not desired. So that is my short take on that.
No, great. With that, may I hand over to Indrajit to take over the rest of the conversation.
Thank you, Anirudh. That was a terrific session and you handled it masterfully. I'd like to thank each of our panelists, Manan, Dr. Bansal, M. Marshall Dharkar, and also to our two speakers, M. Marshall PM Sinha and Nitin Gokhale. Thank you so much for a very provocative discussion. I really enjoyed it. We now kind of move into a slightly different segment, which is more around a session on collective sense making, because we've had almost an hour and a half of conversation. It's now time to not summarize, but at least distill what the insights that you're left with. And I'm going to request a few folks from participants from today's evening to really reflect on what is that one takeaway that they're left with from the conversations that have ensued today, this evening, that should shape India's national policy on AI. I'm going to start with Air Marshal K.K. Novar, former Vice Chief of the Air Staff, who's had obviously very long experience in capacity building, force planning, and strategic decision making. Can I request you to share your comments in a couple of minutes?
Thank you very much, Indrajit. Actually, Manan and Preeti, both of them mentioned that we have the skill sets, we have the capacity, etc., available, and they also talked about sharing of lab facilities. And every time that you have a discussion with the private sector, they always turn up that it's not a level playing field. We do not get the facilities which the DRDO sits on. Okay, now if that is a given, now isn't it necessary for the office of the PSA, Principal Scientific Advisor, to monitor this, to ensure that there's a level playing field? And as far as these youngsters are concerned who are trying their best to come up, because they are very good, but they are denied the lab facilities. If we want, we need to follow the model that is followed in the United States, where it is given to them. Lab facilities are shared very easily. Now, if we want to become a major technological power, I think this is one thing that we need to start. And the second most important thing in my mind is that we lack the final product. Manan had talked about the final product, the deliverables, the patents. Where are the patents? We are lagging very, very badly as far as patents are concerned. China is way ahead of America also.
I'll come kind of next to Mr. Vinod Sood, who chairs the CII Tech Council and brings fairly deep experience at the intersection of technology, policy, and national capability. How did the conversation land with you?
Thanks, Indrajit. And I come from Hughes, which is a deep tech engineering services company. And I have my colleague Amit Gupta, who heads our AI COE. So a couple of things I would talk about. One was the interinstitutional linkages, right? And something very timely, in fact, Amit is part of the industry. He's an industry representative, a committee constituted by Ministry of Defense, DRDO, for verification and validation of AI systems which are going to be inducted into the armed forces. And the good thing is that they are getting industry experts to contribute. And in fact, Amit was part of that committee, and that report got released only yesterday. And it's going to be there in the public domain. Now, one recommendation is that it's only a set of guidelines. Maybe that can be turned into standards, right? Second related thing, again, in terms of, so there are good things happening, there are beginnings which have been made. We also were part of another committee which defined the standards for the Indian radio software architecture, which basically mandates interoperable software defined radio with AI capabilities, right? And again, a very forward-looking step. They got industry to participate in coming up with the specs, and now that platform is being implemented, and again, the industry is implementing it. So we are doing a major part of that work. So I think there's a good step, but as Manan also pointed out, and Air Marshal Sir also pointed out, I think there needs to be much more flexibility. And I'll give one example, okay? Sure. And I think Manan will relate to that because we talked to Manan in terms of whether. So, again, one of the tri-services was looking for a solution, okay? And this was around vision AI. And the requirement was getting to a 95% accuracy. Now, where we were or we are today, and we in fact talked to Manan's company also and few other startups, we were very sure that at this point of time, we can get to about 90% accuracy. But this is more of a research problem, and we will eventually get to 95 or 98, 99%. And 100% will not be possible because, as he also mentioned, it's probabilistic. But then the flexibility I am talking about was that the payment milestones were linked to you will only get paid if you get to 95%. And that is where the private sector will not be able to participate, right? So these were some of the things which I wanted to talk about, the linkages.
Thank you so much.
Second is on the AI use cases, right? We are the use case capital of the world, and in this report also I read that term. But on the other hand, if you see, we are the largest community of software developers in the world. And AI is now going to generate a lot of code. Copilot, GitHub, right? Anthropic Cloud, then Windsurf, Devon, right? All these are American companies, right? Why can't we, maybe we cannot, because it's too capital intensive, cannot focus on the foundational models, but at least the middleware, that is something which we should look at.
Thank you so much for that perspective. I'll come next to Ambassador D.M. Mule, who was a former secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs with deep experience in diplomacy, of course, energy security and strategic affairs. He's also known for introducing new technologies to revolutionize India's passport services. Ambassador Mule, any quick thoughts from what this conversation left you with?
Good evening, and I'd like to compliment the organizers. It's been fairly comprehensive, complex, and confusing, if I may say so. I think it's like more like the 7 blind persons and the elephant. That's how I think it is probability, as Manan said. So my question is, in today's world, strategic doesn't mean only strategic. It goes far beyond that. So from a layman's perspective, where does, for example, the developmental challenges and the AI intersect? I think we need to give it a thought. I also feel that the new education policy says that from 3rd grade and from 2026, 27 onwards, we'll be introducing AI. So what's the kind of preparatory level that we are having? That's the second question that we'll have to all think about. The next one is, the Trump algorithm. Has anybody understood? Frankly, and has anybody seriously analyzed what would be its impact on technology itself overall, and of course AI specific. Third is regulation versus free opportunities. It is said often that IT grew in India because nobody knew in the government what regulation meant and how to really do that. Would it benefit that, or now we have matured to a stage, we do have understanding of the major developments in AI as of now, and we are, onto it. These are some of the thoughts. But I do feel that the foundational challenges was an excellent, point, other than the presentations were, of course, outstanding. And somebody who is like, me, who is a layman, it's been quite invigorating. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you, Ambassador Muley. I have time for one more intervention. Anyone who wants to speak? Okay, Ambassador Smita Purushottam, of course, will have the last word.
No, thank you so much. Such a brilliant panel and very stimulating discussions, very inspiring also. I learned a lot, and I've been in this space for some time, so that's really a great thing for me. I just wanted to make one point. AI is based on data, and no one's brought up this fact that all our data is housed on big tech platforms, whether it's DigiLocker, whether it's a whole lot of other our logistics data, for example, transportation data is on Google, and so the big elephant in the room is big tech. How do indigenous capabilities develop in that scenario? And the one tool that government has is procurement. To transition all this data to indigenous clouds. And in fact, the capture of this, because we've looked at and we've asked many experts, there are no guardrails about our data on these clouds. How they're being used, how they're being processed, or converted into algorithms which may or may not be in our national interest. In any case, they're creating value abroad. They're not creating value here. And Indian capabilities which are creating $4 trillion valuations abroad should be, utilized more strategically here. And someone mentioned about indigenous capabilities. I can assure you we have them. There are many companies in the various groups that I am in which have, for example, data fusion capabilities which are absolutely critical for network-centric warfare. But that particular company was never invited by government, and his technology was never procured. But that would be critical in any war scenario, military scenario. So if the panel and you could incorporate this in your final report and recommendations. The need for indigenization starts with having control over your own data and to have better procurement practices so that Indian companies can benefit.
Okay. Thank you so much, Smita. I think the gentleman just behind you wants to make a statement. Can you just introduce yourself? And
my name is Arvind Mehta. I'm a former Secretary of Government of India.
Sure.
The very short question that I have for the panel is basically, Trump has accelerated global capability centers to India, and India is the capital of the world for GCCs. The question that I have is that all the Indians working there, and this is top-class talent, probably not even on the Indian side, but the GCCs, they have non-disclosure agreements. Whatever they develop is a patent of the GCC. So what are the kind of guardrails is the government policy thinking in terms of its flexibility with the GCCs to not have an IPR umbrella and total patents on that side? Just wanted to throw up that question.
Yeah. So I'd like to thank the panel and request we move to the next segment. So thank you so much. What we've heard this evening is not necessarily a set of answers, because hopefully it's left you with a clearer view of the choices and the trade-offs ahead. Now, to draw all of these strands together and to look ahead, I now invite Sri Alok Joshi, Chairman of the National Security Board Advisory Board, who has spent decades at the heart of India's national security and intelligence establishment. I'd like to invite also Ambassador Saran and Sandeep to join him and accompany him to the stage. The purpose of this session is really to offer a slightly more strategic synthesis of the discussion so far and reflect on what this means for India's path ahead.
Good evening, and thank you, NatStrat, for inviting me. It was a most enlightening discussion, and as Ambassador Muley said, we all have gained in our basic knowledge about AI for a change. I would start by a very interesting quote which I came across, which says AI doesn't just compute, it colonizes. What looks like progress is the power of politics written in code. This sums up the dilemma. On the one hand, we have an aspiration to retain sovereignty and autonomy over our choices. And on the other hand, we face the harsh reality of the dominance of powerful global tech companies due to digital disruption and technology and the cyberspace being undermined by malicious players, both state and non-state actors. I think no one can contest the recommendations. I had gone through the report, which have been drawn up. We need to have AI applications built on our own foundational systems, work out norms for data localization, and build up data centers and resilient networks backed up by a strong national power grid and chip manufacturing capabilities. At the same time, we need to invest in R&D to ensure that we contribute scientific discoveries and cutting-edge technologies. The challenge is how to prioritize when there are limited resources. At the same time, we need to remember that our standing and our capacity to leave an imprint on the global south would largely depend how quickly we are able to deliver on AI-based solutions that enhance productivity and efficiency. To my mind, at this stage, we need to also look into the organizational structures to carry forward the AI mission. Apart from the ISRO space mission, which has been cited in the report, we can also examine other models that are more collaborative, since we are functioning in a federal setup. One of them that comes to my mind, at least, is the GST, where you have a centralized, it was mentioned also by one of the speakers, you have a centralized setup, but you have a distributed and consensus-based arrangement for decision making. We also need to build platforms that give visibility to the efforts being made by the startups. And this is something which one has been grappling with. Why is it, and we need to ask ourselves this question, why is it that startups today still need intermediaries to access the government? I think this is one question that needs to be addressed. This would also avoid fragmentation of effort and conserve our resources. From the national security perspective, issues relating to data security, both in transit and at rest, are being addressed. However, we need to set up centers of excellence, which has already been mentioned earlier, where the IITs have been involved. But we need such centers more to evaluate the impact of foundational models, standardize the adoption of such models, and set up, from the trust viewpoint, systems that can give us, the assurance as far as trust is concerned, which is right now one of the major issues. The threats from uncontrolled AGI are real, and as mentioned, the same need to be evaluated. However, there are other variables, and I don't want to sound paranoid on this, but there are other variables in the which can be handled, which can be detected timely and neutralized, and which are being currently monitored regularly. At the end of the day, we'll have to strike a balance between sovereignty and outreach with trusted parties. This is where diplomacy will come into play. The name of the game is trust but verify.
Thank you, Sri Joshi. Before we close, I'd like to invite my good friend Jai Bikram Bakshi to offer the closing reflections and vote of thanks. Jai is a board member and entrepreneurial mentor and has worked closely with the organizing team in shaping this evening's dialogue. Jai, over to you.
Thank you, IG. Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure and privilege to offer a vote of thanks at the conclusion of this pivotal dialogue on India's AI strategic trajectory. As we go back and reflect on the 4 S imperatives of India's AI Gambit: science, security, the state in search of strategic autonomy, we must thank the speakers for this evening and their brilliance. On behalf of all the attendees here, my heartfelt thanks go to Ambassador Pankaj Saran for framing AI as a domain of national power. Dr. V.K. Saraswat, through this video address, showed us how institutions and autonomy strike us, and I especially remember the OODA loop, and I think that is something which I'm going to carry home. And of course, Sandeep Vaslekar, for your insightful recommendations packaged in a story which started last Thursday. Sir, I'm always enamored by your narratives. Thank you for your strategic foresight, and I appreciate your enthusiasm for my personal contribution on federated AI architecture in your report, which was launched today. I thank all the panelists for the integrated dialogue panel. M. Marshall Dharkar. It was very interesting to not only listen to you, but also your points on acceleration with caution. Manan Suri, the trade-offs that you mentioned and the advantages that we need to play on, especially when you're looking at data and skills, as a balance off against investment and compute. And Preeti Bansal, for your dual use strategic approach, I think there is a case there. Alongside, of course, interventions from Air Marshal Sinha and Nitin Gokhale. I would also like to thank participants with a special word of thanks for Air Marshal Nohar on the intervention on lab access. That was a very vital point. Vinod Sood, my old colleague and current compatriot at CII, on your pricing models. That's, I think, something which one can think about. And Ambassador Moulay on the school level integration that you are mentioning, which actually roots this conversation on preparing for the future. Not just these inputs, but so much of your insights and perspectives have made this collective dialogue so rich. I thank you all for your insights on capability, security, and the sequencing that you're providing in this vital AI roadmap. Now, please bring your hands together for Indrajit Gupta and Team Founding Fuel for doggedly pursuing this project for almost 18 months from our first conversation on this topic. Big applause for Team NatStrat and everybody there. Yes. And of course, Anirudh Suri for doing a masterful job in doing this heavy lifting and anchoring this entire place. Lastly but not leastly, Ilmas Fateh Ali and Team Strategic Foresight Group for the work that went behind unveiling this AI Gambit, and the production team sitting right behind for the seamless execution, both from the video transitions and the reflections. Your orchestration ensured intellectual depth without disruption. As we mull on the thoughts that were shared here, let us bring in our unique perspectives to act on these imperatives. Let us all act to make sure we end up, as Manan put it, rule shapers, AI OEMs, rather than rule takers in AI services. And my last plug, if you don't already do, please follow and subscribe to Founding Fuel content on podcasts and e-zines. We would like to share with you and hear from you on this important and strategic topic. I know each one of you is a contributor, and it's a two-way process. I would like to end this vote of thanks with a prayer, and by saying Om Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamosoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. From illusion to reality, from darkness to illumination, from death to eternal life, I pray for peace. I'm wishing you all a happy Sankranti. Thank you and good night.